I appreciate that, Dave. I don't know if there's other people in town that would applaud the former Doug Williams at Chico High School being the principal, but hopefully we get better with age, right? As they say, on the fine wine, hopefully. I'm very thrilled to be here. As I look around, I see people that were mentors to me as people in this community. I'm looking across at faces, friends of my parents who are sitting in the second row here, Jim and Marilyn Williams, who my dad really gave me my love of history. I want to thank the people of the Chico History Museum because as a history teacher, and I think it's really important now in our digital age and the vast amount of movement that people do in their lives as students and as young people just moving in a modern world, that if you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. And so I think that community and place and stories like the missile silo can bring people together even if you came from different places because they're shared spaces. As this is a shared space, I remember walking through this when it was a library when I was a young kid. So I think I appreciate the fact that you're here. And I hopefully that whether it's at the dinner tables at the holiday telling stories with your families or people you run into, we remember how important it is to talk about the past. And even though kids or students or young people may look like they're not listening, they're listening. And they're probably going to run in the other room and get on their phones and find out more information, or that maybe grandpa was off a little bit. So they're pretty savvy researchers. So I got my teaching credential in Sonoma in the 90s and started teaching history down there. And what really brought me back to Chico, my wife is from Chico as well, and she's a school psychologist. And when I got here, of course you take a drive around, and I drove down Kiefer Road, and there the missile silo was. It's kind of like always been in my past. In the middle of doing research for Chico State when I was completing a master's, some of this research led me to a professor at the University of Utah, because in Tooele, Utah is where our nation's weapons incinerary dump is. It's where they robotically dismantle nuclear and chemical weapons. And so it pulled me, unfortunately, as a young person, out of my research from Chico State. And as all young people, I chased brighter stars. But that also led me to teaching and taking a substitute job to make ends meet. And I fell in love with being a teacher. And that's what led me to becoming a high school teacher and then eventually a principal. So I think all things happen for a reason. What I'd like to say about this particular gathering is I'm standing on the research of hundreds of other people. So my presentation today is going to be completely available for everyone here. And at the end, I'll give you my contact information because I'm going to just basically be showing you clips of things to tell a story. But there's hours of things that I know if you're a history buff, which you are if you're here, you're going to want to go home and maybe click on. So I might show you a missile base where they're teaching scavenged scuba diving in an old Titan I missile site that is flooded and they're actually diving the site. And I might show you a couple minutes of that during this presentation, but when you get the link from me, you could watch an hour and 30 minutes of the details of that. So I'm hoping that this presentation is a chance for us to talk about our local community, turn to our neighbors and chat about the Cold War as it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and now. But ultimately, get this presentation to you to share with yourselves or others to kind of go do your own investigation. I am not an expert. I do not have a PhD. I'm a history enthusiast. What I think is just great about the Chico History Museum, but also the internet in general, is libraries are definitely important and books are important, but with the technology we have, if you want to go find something out now, you can go grab what other people have done and put it together. And maybe you're not hitting it 100% right on target with exactly what happened, but you're coming really close and you can share it with other people. So I wanted to mention that before I started. I'm going to start us off. If you would indulge me for a moment, would you please close your eyes without getting too dizzy? I want you to think back to a moment when you were either a young adult or a middle-aged or middle school kid or a kid or in your 20s or 30s. People now don't get that in the 1950s, 1960s, and the beginning of the 1970s, everyone in the United States lived with the Cold War. there was some type of message, whether it was an assassination attempt, whether it was potential Cuban Missile Crisis, whether it was get under your desk because we're practicing a shelter-in-place drill. And I want you to kind of remember what that was like. And then in about 4 seconds, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes, okay? And I'm going to take you back a little bit with our government's kind of reasoning for creating promotions and trying to get people to understand what's going on, okay? So go ahead and open your eyes.
The ground stood barren. The valley was empty. The hills were bare. But overhead,
go ahead and look.
The sky was filled with promise and with challenge. To meet the challenge and fulfill the promise, in the empty valley they built a giant. And they gave it the name of a giant in Greek mythology, Titan, a child of earth and heaven.
So obviously those are governmental promotions, but I think why I'm starting with that is not just the dramatic impact of taking us back to propaganda or Cold War information, but during this discussion, the way I've outlined the presentation is we're going to talk about the construction of the missile site, we're going to talk about the operational time period of the missile site, and we're going to talk about the decommissioned aspect of the missile site, and it's what's been done with other sites and now in terms of what I call the abandonment period. So when it's decommissioned and it's been there for 20, 30 years, what are sites being used for? Are they all boarded up? Can you get into them? Are any of them being used for any other purposes? And so that's going to be the flow of my presentation, is just kind of a timeline of construction, operation, decommission, and now what? But kind of a subcontext is I think it's important to note that there is a national discussion and a local discussion about larger aspects that were going on in the United States. And I do think that's what's unique about the Titan Missile Base in our community, is people will talk about it as a missile site, they'll talk about it as a place to go look at, but it also really does connect Chico to the larger component of the Strategic Air Command, mutual assured destruction, the Cold War, the space race. So it has larger implications. And so underneath each one of those sub-chapters of construction, operation, and decommission, I'm going to talk about the local aspect and then kind of what the national context was going on. And so briefly, the construction phase really begins after Sputnik. Okay, so in World War II, we are competing with the V-2 rocket, and our rocket technology is moving kind of at a slow pace. But when World War II ends, most of our energies are placed into atomic bombs and bombs of that nature. The Oppenheimer project, which if you don't know what that is, that's the construction of, right, the Manhattan Project with Oppenheimer, and that's construction of the atomic bomb in World War II. That has some local context too, because they did research on that across the United States. They divided up the research to different universities. So different universities were in charge of different aspects of the Manhattan Project. And the closest one I actually took a class in it was next to a chem lab in Davis. Davis had some research going on there, as did Berkeley. So after World War II, a lot of the energy that had been put into just the nature of the atomic bomb was put into bombers. And really that was the mode of delivery. And in the background was the development of better missiles, right? Mainly from a lot of the Germans that we had taken from Germany during the war and at the end of the war that were coming over and help us with rocket development. So the rocket before the Titan was the Atlas missile. And the Atlas missile system was run by the Army. And there were some Atlas sites. Actually, there's Atlas sites on Angel Island. If you want to go do a little unique walking trip, you can take a shuttle from Tiburon to Angel Island, and there's still Atlas sites that are campgrounds that you can actually go on the state parks and you can camp there. Obviously, there's no missiles, but that missile had a short range. Its targeting ability was limited, and it also was very expensive to kind of maintain. And so the United States in 1956 decided under the Eisenhower administration that it needed to upgrade its missile systems, and it needed to dump a lot more money. And that's where the Titan program emerged. They wanted to have a dual missile system, the Atlas system and the Titan system to back it up. And so they began to put out bids for construction. The Martin Marietta Corporation is the one that won the bid. And then they started to look for places to place these missiles, okay? And so the Titan missile, although it was constructed from 59 to 62 in Chico, it was only operational, you'll see, for a short time because the advancements between the Soviets and ourselves at that point were happening so rapidly that it's almost like as soon as we developed missile technology, the next technology made the old one obsolete. And that's kind of the niche where Titan kind of fits. And then we move on to the Titan II, eventually the Titan III, which also became the booster systems for our space program, and then the Minuteman program, and we get into the nuclear triad. So I'm going to talk about each one of those a little bit as we walk forward here, okay? If you want to know where these missiles are, and every young kid does, I'm going to refer to several sites. Again, this is probably the most preeminent site that I've found with the most updated information. It's called the Military Standards, and this one's just on the Titan. It has almost every weapon system in the United States on it. Very detailed information. You can find out like exactly what warhead was made, where it was made, schematics. It's a great site, and again, it'll be on the presentation that I'll send you at the end. But as you can see, these are all the Titan sites in the country. And so they're at Lowry Air Force Base, Ellensworth Air Force Base, Mountain Home Air Force Base, Larson Air Force Base, and then here we are at Beale. So the Chico missile site, Beale Air Force Base, the division was the 851st Division, Missile Division, and it housed 3 sites, one at Beale Air Force Base, one in the Buttes, and one at Chico. And each site held 3 missiles. So there's a 9 missile cluster, and then each site has a silo A, a silo B, and a silo C. And as anything in the military, they're going to try to duplicate services to save money. Each site is almost identical other than where it's located. Same schematics, everything's identical across the board with all the Titan I sites. So when if you're going to do continued research on the Titan, or as you look at some of my clips, sometimes I'm grabbing stuff to show you that's not from the Titan silo because the information's not available, but I'll grab it from another Titan I site when they go underground. I do have actual footage of our Titan site, but they're all the same. So you kind of can, there's a duplication of vision in all of those. The question remains too, if you would like, you can actually click, we'll go to Chico. It'll take you to, this is an older satellite picture. It'll take you exactly to the site of where the one is in the Buttes, where the one is next to Beale Air Force Base, which right now actually there's a housing development encroaching on the base there, and it's only about maybe 100 yards from where the old site was. But what I like to do is play around with Google Earth, because like, where is this right now? So if you take these coordinates and you put them into Google Earth, you can get the most up-to-date. So there's our Titan site. When I say now, if you don't understand how Google Earth works, think of your grandmother's quilt, right? The world is a quilt. Each picture of a satellite is a piece of that quilt. Not all the pieces of the quilt were taken at the same time. So when you're looking at Google Earth, one of the pictures you're looking at might be from 10 years ago, and another picture you're looking at might be from a year ago. So even though you're scrolling through and it's seamlessly showing you the planet, it's not really a complete accurate time snapshot. And so I don't know about the Titan sites, but I know I go and look at the Vandenberg Air Force site because I served at Vandenberg in the summer one year. And Vandenberg Air Force Base, if you don't know, is in Central California, you know, right outside of Lompoc. And actually they have a complete space launch system there. And they have a runway there because that's where the secondary landing site for the space shuttle is. The reason I'm telling you that is if you went to look at that on Google Earth, I do not think that's an up-to-date shot. I'm guessing that satellite shot's definitely probably a year or so delayed. So when you go to Google, you lose some time track there. But if you're looking at like going to the buttes and seeing where these sites are, you can get right down to it. If you aren't familiar with CHICO'S site, I'll try to give you some context. We're here, right? Chico State University, roughly, downtown Chico. And we're going north, and here's our airport. And there's the corner of Kiefer Road and Cohasset. And there's the site. I've got a story my mom, who's sitting in the second row, probably doesn't want me to say, but I'm going to say it. I remember when I was a young kid, and probably my fault, not my mother's, we were late to a baseball game because there's a Little League park out by the airport, West Side Little League. And on our way out there, sometimes, Mom, in the summer, we would have to hang my uniform out the window of the Volkswagen bus as we were driving out there so the 110-degree weather could dry the uniform, because they were cotton back then, right? Before I could get on the field. And I remember even as a young kid, probably 11 or 12, that, you know, back then the roads in Chico were not very good north of East Avenue. Just, you know, there are 2 layers of asphalt, right? And yeah, some are the same now, right? I heard that. So I remember rumbling out there, and I remember thinking, how come when we get by the airport, the road gets like, it's kind of raised. Drive it. It's crowned, like it's not like some guy did it. It's like perfectly crowned. It's on a thicker road base. Like it's further down to the water ditch there. And at the time, there's a nice sweeping turn. It's not like a 90-degree angle. Well, I later found out, obviously, they had to make that road to withstand the weight of bringing in the Titan missiles. So when they're driving the Titan missiles in, obviously, they're bringing them in on the back of flatbed trucks in sections. And if you just had a 2-layer county road, that semi would be sunk up to the axles by the time you even got out there. So there's a lot of side context to the Titan ballistic missile sites, just like there are with any government project in your community they're kind of very interesting, in my opinion. So we talked about this. The missile, the Atlas missile, the Titan 1, the Titan 2, and the Minuteman, those make up our strategic force, or ICBM force. So back in those eras, the government, per se, our experts, were trying to decide, are we going to react to a nuclear strike by the Soviet Union, or are we going to have what's called first strike capability? So there was that argument between, which is a philosophical and a military argument. If something goes down, are we going to be the ones that launch, or are we going to wait and then retaliate? And so the reason this is important is most of our people believe that we needed to have both first strike capability and second strike capability. And the reason that ties into the Titan complex is the entire Titan site has 2 shells. It has an outer shell and an inner shell. So when I show you some pictures of these concrete domes, they have massive springs on a lot of the equipment. Even the toilets had springs on them, because the complex could actually move between 6 inches and a foot, being shaken back and forth and still maintain its integrity in case there was a first strike. Well, we wouldn't be here, and the History Museum might not be here, but the missile base hopefully would have been there. So that's what I'm explaining a little bit, how the national context or knowledge of what our strategic defense initiatives we're doing affect the local community. This site breaks down the Cold War better than any other site from a non-emotional standpoint, non-human standpoint. It breaks it down in terms of what was going on with armament. So if you're a person that wants to know what bombers are being used, when were B-52s upgraded, when did we start what was called the nuclear triad, right? Which is land-based, air-based, and sea-based launched nuclear weapons. When did that occur? The link, and I'm kind of showing you how to use this, the link that says Cold War and gets you to this, well, you can go down a rabbit hole on this site for like 5 hours and figure out everything you're going to want to know. Well, in 1957, the Titan development is going along kind of slowly. But obviously, what happened in 1957, those of you who remember 1957? Sputnik. Those who go back any deeper, Sputnik, right? So big blow to the United States, a blow to our ego, a blow to our psyche, and a scare. To think that, wow, the Soviet Union actually launched something first, and that's actually orbiting our planet. And obviously our military leaders, there was a huge shock to them that they could actually get ahead of us there. And so they accelerated the development of the Titan I program. And at that point, in 1957 is when they basically put a timeline on, we're going to have some Titan sites built by 1959 and 1960. And so we're really going to put as much effort as we can. Personally too, I think that's where CHICO comes into play. This will go through the history of the Atlas, but I'm going down to the 1956, 57. So at the Nike and the Atlas sites, those were called intermediate range ballistic missiles. So their distances are, between 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles, 2,500 miles. So that's why, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the whole Kennedy assassination, all that is tied to Turkey because we had missiles in Turkey. So the Titan was going to be really the first missile that was an ICBM. And so what that really means in layman terms is it can go over about 5,000 nautical miles. And so the Titan I could go about 6,800 nautical miles. They say 5,500, but it's about almost 7,000 nautical miles. So what that means is it's got to be placed somewhere. And these are polar orbits. So if anyone's ever done any traveling to China or Japan, it's a lot quicker to go over the polar cap than it is to go all the way around the globe, obviously, because the globe's morphed. So the reason that's important is CHICO's in a northern location within our country, right? It also is on the coastline. And the other key element, which is not in these documents, but it's kind of hidden when you find it, is they're also looking for Air Force bases, because Air Force was tasked with the ICBM deployment. And so they're looking for places that have Air Force bases that have the room. They're kind of located in an arena that goes within the 6,000 mile radius. And they're also probably in an area that might not be completely populated with 5 million people, right? So if you start checking off those boxes, Beale Air Force Base was a decommissioned base in the 1950s. So they look at Beale and they think, hey, let's bring Beale back online. And Beale didn't just do the ICBMs, they did lots of other things, SR-71. It turns into a refueling place. It's still an active base now. But they also look at it and think, hey, not a bad spot to form one of our ballistic missile bases. And then the area around it is pretty remote. I also think that geologically, they started looking at places that could be built where possibly there was some, not a lot of sediment and maybe some protection from first strike capability. So if you look at the Sutter Butte site, and if you look at the CHICO site, they are kind of near a lava cap, and they kind of are in areas that if you are targeting from the Soviet Union, might be hard to get at, because they're not right in the middle of an open field. Even the Titan at this point has about an accuracy radius of about 3 miles. So the nuclear warhead is so big, they're thinking, you only have to be accurate in horseshoes and hand grenades, right? But ballistic missiles too. If you get within 3 miles with a ballistic missile, you're probably doing a pretty good job. So I think that also tied into why they selected the site at the Buttes, Beale Air Force Base, and then the Chico site. This is just a site if you're really interested in the raising of the missile. The other unique feature of the Titan I, it was the only missile of the intercontinental ballistic missile that was ever technically raised out of the silo. So it also was part of its demise because it took 15 minutes to raise it. So there's two parts to the missile. Its launch sequence, which you can get on this link. The first part is it's got to be raised. It's a 98-foot tall missile, and it has to be raised out of the silo. And then as you saw in the opening, it's launched from a raised location. So it's exposed for about 9 to 10 minutes. It's an exposed ballistic missile. So that also ties into our first strike, second strike capability. The other aspect of the Titan is these first missile systems are liquid fueled. So when you launch a rocket, you have an oxidizer, and then you have another fuel source that goes with it. And in this missile, there was liquid nitrogen, and then it had it's actually JP7, but it's like a kerosene-based fuel. And the fuel was not stored in the missile. It was actually stored at the base in giant tanks, and then super pumped into the missile right before it launched. That also is a reason why it took 15 minutes. That's also why there was an explosion when they constructed the base, which I'll go into in a little bit, that actually killed a person on a fire, and the crew had to be sent to Oroville, Orland, Hamilton City, Enloe, and I think one other hospital to deal with smoke inhalation. And that was during construction. But the complexity of launching this missile was immense in order to super pump all that, store all that, and then also give it a 15-minute launch time. So that's another aspect of why it probably was decommissioned, because the Titan II missile could be launched from inside the silo. There was one Titan I missile that was launched in a silo. It was at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and they did that to test to see if they could actually do it. So they did launch a Titan I, and you can actually find a video of it. It glitches, so I didn't add it to this presentation. But it was really dangerous. When I was stationed at Vandenberg, they gave us a helicopter tour of the base, and it actually blew up in the silo the first time they tested it. And the guys sitting next to it in the control room all lived, but it rattled their teeth a little bit. And so I think that kind of shows the dangers that we're talking about with launching ballistic missiles. So the missile itself was constructed to basically get up and get out and destroy something, and the silo would be completely destroyed as well. So the secondary launches of these systems also caused some problems. But the way these missiles worked is when they're launched, it's probably going to fry everything in that silo. They did have vent tubes and things of that nature, but when that thing's taken off, that silo probably wasn't going to be reused. It's probably a one-time shot. I think the other reason too why they picked Beale Air Force Base is the crews that manned these sites rotated on 48 and 36-hour shifts. So these are gentlemen that are living at Beale Air Force Base, and then they're driving out to the sites. They're going down in and living down there. There's full kitchens. There's a little dormitory, and then there's a launch room. So there's two crews down there. There's a crew that's kind of sleeping and hanging out, and then there's a crew that's actually in the locked room with like the movies where you see the keys. And the reason I say Beale is it's not going to really cause a lot of people concern if a couple people are in military trucks driving to Chico on Highway 99 on a 36-hour or 40, every 2 or 3 days. People aren't going to really notice that. It's not going to really cause concern. This was a single warhead, and what I mean by that is later on there are nuclear missiles that when they go into outer space and they start to fall for targeting, they split into multiple warheads, and then those warheads can target multiple sites. The Titan is a single warhead. So it's primarily was used to target large cities or very large military installations in the Soviet Union or China. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is turn to the person next to you for a moment. If you don't know them, if you know them. Ask them, or have a little brief conversation. Do you know anybody, or do you remember anything about the construction of the base? Or have you heard anything going on about the construction of the base? Take about 2 minutes. Sorry. Okay, I'll bring it back. Would anybody like to report something they learned from someone next to them that actually knew somebody who worked on it, or a story from a family member? Anyone out there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Dad's friend worked on it, Frank Paul, right?
He worked on the base?
He's a carpenter, yeah, and between stints in the Marine Corps, he finally went back to the Marine Corps, but yeah, he came over the house at a party and kind of told us about what was going on out there. We were like, oh, wow, that's something. Yeah.
So there were local people that were employed in the construction of the base. There weren't a lot of them because when a lot of the work was done, the excavation work was immense. 650,000 tons of dirt were removed. Because what you're going to see here in a moment is some pictures of that. Because the way I thought of it as a kid was it'd be like if you had the old hamster habit trail with their tunnels and their little rooms they sat in. They basically dug a huge hole in the ground and then built concrete domes with tubes between them, including the silo. And then they covered them all up, and then they had people go in there and they built fake square rooms, right? So it would look operational, and brought all the equipment in. A lot of the people that worked on these were brought in for bigger companies though. So they would work for Martin Marietta, or they were concrete experts from outside. But there were local people that worked on it, yeah.
What did they do with all of the soil that they took out to put that stuff in? Did they just make mounds around the area, or did they carry it away?
Well, most of it they pushed right back on top,
okay.
Right? But some of it they also used to manipulate the landscape, because there was a cooling pond, so they had to make a cooling pond. There's another site in Washington which a young woman walks you through, her parents lived next to it. She got permission to go into it. It's in better shape than the CHICO'S site. And so the video of that I'll show you is fabulous. She does a 3-part series where she walks you through every room. She'll talk about every single room and what's going on. And it's fabulous. But a lot of that dirt where she was at, there were mounds, like you said, that they kind of pushed over in the corner, even after they decommissioned it. Yes?
I don't know if you're going to show this in a later slide, but at the Chico Air Museum, if you've ever been there, out at the old air base, there's a good picture of the drawing. There's a drawing there of what that construction looked like with all the dirt on, and just the missile site in there.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And there obviously there's some concrete, and there's busted stuff laying around. So we'll get into that because it's caused liability problems for some of the people that have purchased that site. But most of the dirt they put right back on top.
At Cape Canaveral, the nation's newest ICBM intercontinental ballistic missile is ready for its maiden flight. The Air Force's 90-foot missile is more powerful and technically more sophisticated than the Atlas, which is nearing operational stage. But the 2-stage Titan is still in the development stage. Its ultimate range will be possibly as much as 9,000 miles.
That's the 2.
The moment of truth is at hand for the Titan.
They merged the launch
Site we're at
with the
today,
detonation on that shot.
Nuclear missile base, so it housed 3 Titan I ICBMs. This was Cold War, early 60s.
So there you go. This gentleman operates a site in Arizona, but he has the best schematics. You can find these schematics lined up on the link that I'm going to give you, but he does a really good job. And so basically there it is, right? You've got a control room. Yep, you've got a control room right here. And that's where the kind of living quarters were. Over here, you have different rooms, top and bottom. You have diesel generators, pumps that are circulating air and air conditioning, and also fuel pumps. And then from there, the tubes go to the different silos. So in this one, this one has, you'll see launcher 3, you can see the control center, launcher 1, launcher 2, and it also had its own antennas. So there were antennas that actually raised, and in Chico, the interesting one is there's also an antenna if you go up Hogs Back Road on the way to Red Bluff. You're driving to Red Bluff, and before you get to Red Bluff, there's a little old rambling road that goes up to the creeks up in there, and there's an antenna that the base is still there, because if you think about the valley, when these launch, as the foothills kind of pinch in towards Red Bluff, that antenna could control these ICBMs all the way until they got, because they're launching pretty much in a northern trajectory, and that antenna could follow them all the way until they got almost past the Cascades. And so that's why you see, well, I thought there was 3 launches. There's 4 because it has antennas that raised as well. And then each one of the launch sites has a place where there's a control room, and there's also where they have the 2 fuels stored. So the fuel was stored separately for each missile next to the silo, and then super pumped and then raised. So all the sites are almost identical to that schematic right there. So that's an awful lot of dirt to move.
Yeah. My name is David Bruns, and I'm an instructor at Undersea Adventures in Kennewick. There was never any missiles fired from this base. They did all the Titan I testing down in somewhere in Colorado. So the missiles were deployed here, and they sat here for just over 2 years, and then these sites were decommissioned, and they took the missiles out. Well, these sites were decommissioned because they were obsolete before they were even done being built. They had better missiles with longer range and more accuracy, and that were less maintenance to maintain before this was even activated. So this base is flooded.
So we'll get to this later. This gentleman does a very good job of walking you through the base. When I send this out to you, I'll highlight the links that I think are the better links, but a lot of these people, I don't want to have them speak what I told you about, and vice versa. They speak better than I do about this. But I will highlight those when I send you the link. So if there's a highlighted link, it's one I think that someone's not just showing you a shot, but they're walking you through the base and what it meant. And there's just some great stuff. Sorry.
At Cape Canaveral, the nation's
Deep in
newest
Washington
ICBM
State
intercontinental
is a Titan missile silo that was on the front line of America's Cold War defense. The Larson Air Base Titan I missile silo. Deep in Washington State is a Titan missile silo that was on the front line of America's Cold War defense.
Underground.
The Larson Air
To get an idea of the immensity of this place, you really have to get down there and see the size of those launch tubes and the other supporting structures that are down there. It'll blow your mind.
Today, much of this facility lies beneath water.
When you get to the launcher, you'll be on the service elevator, and the service elevator is permanently stuck at the top end of the missile, which is where it was frozen into place from the water and lack of service. And that's where you step off of when you begin the dive. And that's really where you see the enormity of the launch tubes themselves. You look overhead and you see those launch doors are closed, 125 tons apiece.
Across this site are 3 of these spaces.
The 3 silos
So I think that's about the best schematic you're going to look at real time. So that's a immense amount of space to be taken out. And you see a continuing theme in these sites that a lot of them, the groundwater is seeped in. It hasn't happened so much in the CHICO'S site because Richardson Springs, I believe, is the creek that runs down it, and it's the floodplain, it's below it. And it's a little bit above there. But in a lot of other sites, it's hard to explore them, and so they've gone to scuba diving, and it's kind of cool because the sites have, the groundwater, they just can't keep the groundwater out. But as you can see, that's an immense amount of excavation. So that is probably what they did here is they went down, they leveled it off, and then they started to form concrete domes that they poured, and then they constructed those and using that type of a technique.
So all linked by tunnels containing living quarters, a medical centre, and most crucially, a command and control centre. And these were all centred around the missiles to maximise the speed with which they could be got ready and fired.
So we're in the control room. This is definitely the heart of the facility. The control systems in this room controlled the fueling, the liquid oxygen, the rocket propellant, the whole launch sequence, the raising of the antennas, because those also had to be done, and the initialization of the countdown, which we have to remember took 15 minutes from the time that they hit the go button.
Another important aspect technologically of these sites is these were the only sites, or the last sites, I should say, that used to open the launch doors because obviously it's a lot harder to do that than it is to slide them. So if you're ever, when you're looking at other missile silos, the Titan II and even the Minuteman silos, they figured out it's going to make more sense to have all that concrete and steel on a track that slides and slides back. And the other reason I bring this up is when I was a kid, and for many years, those doors were open out there. You could drive by, remember, and see those open. And I was speaking with someone before the presentation. I don't know, there's two reasons for that, and I haven't been able to find out which one it is. One is, did they need them open because when they signed the SALT I and SALT II treaties, which is the Strategic Arm Limitation Treaties of the 70s and the 80s, potentially maybe satellites were not as good, and possibly in the negotiations with the Soviet Union and China and ourselves, probably said, these are the sites we have, but these are decommissioned, and we're probably like, yeah, right, they're decommissioned. And there probably was something in there about, you got to leave the doors open so when our satellites go over, they can see if there's a nuclear hotspot or whatever. I haven't found that out. Or is it just they left them open because they had to get everything out of there, and then because of the liability of people falling in there, they made them close them. But right now, they're not open anymore. They're all closed and they're all sealed. So I don't know if that's because satellites are better now, so might as well close them because the satellites can project down further into the ground to see if there's a nuclear warhead in there, or if it's because of safety reasons. But for most of the time, when they were decommissioned till about the late 90s and early 2000s, those doors were open. I think that's an interesting kind of sub-point. Again, this part, this link, like I said, you want to get detailed, like it's going to give you, there's the generators. Okay, so again, I'll highlight that site, but if you want to go down a wormhole, you can find out, you know, exactly how many kilowatts each generator gave, you know, how long they were there, all those things. And this site, again, that one is a great resource. The CHICO construction, for me, the person that has done the best work of anybody that I've found is Tyler Ash. Tyler Ash was a journalist, a historical buff, and did some unbelievable work. And he wrote an article that it was also put in the News and Review about the CHICO missile complex, which in my opinion is unprecedented because it is the most local connected article about the missile site. And so here's a link to his original work before it went to the News and Review. So it's got all of his pictures even that he didn't use, and a lot of his research and a lot of his quotes from people that he went out and interviewed that are either no longer with us or, you know, people don't have the time to find. That's the CHICO. Those are the doors. Look at the size of those pistons, right? And if you click, there's a link here which will actually take you to the Chico News and Review article. And then you can download that article in printable form. So on that one link, you're going to get his research, and then you're going to get the News and Review article. When they constructed it, there was a stoppage because of 2 explosions. The one I told you about before, which had to do with the pumping of the fuel and a miscue. There also was a fire. I don't know why. I don't know if a welder sparked something, but there was a fire that caused the situation. Like I said, you can go to, I originally found it on one of those old microfiche machines, you know, the ones that you're looking at in the library and they're going back and forth. Chico State has a great collection, but if you go look in the microfiche, there's some local news articles, but they're very spotty. It's kind of like 4th page, halfway down, a little paragraph about the explosion, and then 2 days later, maybe a little story about some people that checked into Enlo and they had smoke inhalation, and you kind of got to piece together all these little pieces. But if you're looking for a straight local, like I want to sit down and read for 10 minutes and get like just a quick look at what's going down, this News and Reviews article is outstanding. And this is just to humor you. That's what I'm talking about, right? Right, so there's a microfiche shot, right, from the Enterprise record, blast of Chico missile site, and then over here there's the UPI release of it, which I'll read it. An explosion rocked the Titan missile base near here today. The Air Force reported it was not immediately certain whether the explosion occurred in one of the base's 3 Titan I silos, according to Beale Air Force Base Public Information Officer Captain Charles Evans. Ambulances transported at least 7 men to Enlo Hospital. The Chico Fire Department reported that men suffered from smoke inhalation and burns. The Air Force said the explosion occurred shortly after 7 a.m. So if you go and look for other articles later, you'll get like bits and pieces of kind of what happened. So it's obviously when we're building ballistic missile sites, it's hard to get up-to-date direct information that's easy to find. I don't think the government works like that. I don't think it's any cloak and dagger conspiracy to cover up. It's just information is not going to be given out, I think, rapidly and freely. So the operation phase, the operation of the base was really only for about 2.5 years. The Chico base was the last one to have a missile lowered down into it because the explosions set it back. And so of all the Titan I bases, it was the last one to get a missile lowered into it and activated. It did its part. It served for 3 years, and this is kind of really interesting. This is where it really ties into, in my opinion, the Eisenhower-Kennedy handoff. Right when Kennedy's coming in, he's faced, whether how you feel about him or not, he's faced with this dilemma of, still, the Soviets are kicking our butt. We gotta increase missile technology. I'm kind of not a war hawk. Remember our dove on our hawk conversations in history? A dove is someone who's looking for peaceful, a government's peaceful actions to negotiate with foreign countries, and a hawk is geared towards more of a military strength. And so Kennedy's caught between being elected as a dove and maybe having to operate as a hawk. And so one of the speeches he gives, in my opinion, about going to the moon and beyond is an important speech for America for space exploration. It's also an unbelievably great speech because then you can take all the intercontinental ballistic missiles that you have, increase the money being spent on missile technology, and switch it to space boosters and space exploration technology, and take some of your programs like Titan II and Titan III, maybe move them into under NASA, and then increase the amount of funding or money being spent on booster technology. Do you follow that kind of train of thought? You got to do a lot of reading to tie those threads together. There's quite a few books on strategic defense initiatives. You can go look at budget proposals and things of that nature. But it's brilliant, really, in my opinion. I mean, and the government has an obligation to protect us from a peaceful standpoint, but they also have an obligation to protect us from a military or a strategic standpoint. So I think the Titan decommissioning was not 100% tied to that, but definitely by decommissioning a Titan I, it allowed for better weapons to be developed, more accurate weapons to be developed, longer range missiles, quicker response times, and also added to just the technological knowledge that we would learn to put people on the moon, which was certainly a part, obviously, of the space race. Those are all my opinions, by the way. Those are not... Dad, don't say anything, okay? This is also really cool because obviously as citizens at Chico, people started to become concerned. What's going on out at the missile base? What are these explosions happening? Where are the nuclear weapons? Are they radioactive? Think about this, when they transport them here, where do they go? Right? Did they go down 99 and then up Kiefer? Did they go into the town? I guarantee you they probably were not on a truck that said United States Air Force Ballistic Missile Division. Right? They're probably in a truck Mayflower moving, right? Or something of that nature, right? And so there's a group of people that started to be concerned with this, and probably a lot of you know this. That's where the Chico Peace Movement or Peace and Freedom Foundation started. So when you're either cheering on the people on 3rd, you know, when you're driving by, or you're waving to them, or you're mad because you got to go get a cup of coffee, the Chico Ballistic Missile Base is what brought about those concerns. And you can't see this, but this article goes into detail on the women that started it, who they were, how it began, when they started it. Yeah. So this link is great. It really goes into the detail about why they want to do that. It breaks down the exit to Kiefer Road and some of the concerns with if there was a fuel leak, where's it going to go, things of that nature. So I think that's another reason why the Titan is important, is we think about protesting nuclear weapons or protesting the death of people or wasting government funding on that rather than education or supporting people. And so it also means what's going on in your local community. And so I think Chico has a unique tie that way, that we're certainly, I think in this community generally, a very pro-America, pro kind of like freedom of speech, freedom of transfer of goods and services. We call it supply chain issues now, but we're really talking about a global distribution of services, which we're trying to protect with a nuclear umbrella, so to speak. But at the same time, we got to be concerned about our own health and our own safety. And I think this movement ties into that too. So I think the Titan base has really, really unique spokes historically, locally, and regionally with people's political views for great reasons on both sides. The reason I put that map up there is you can see the green is what happened when they decommissioned the missiles. So right away your mind says, wow, we kind of moved everything to the middle of the country, right? So the next series of missile systems moved into the Dakotas, into Colorado, and into Wyoming. So those are the ones in green, right? And the red were the ones that were decommissioned. And again, part of that's probably twofold. First of all, the Titan II and the further missiles went from 6,000 miles nautical range to 9 to 11,000. So they could go further distances. They probably also want to be able to reach other countries that were maybe not just China and the Soviet Union, but maybe they had to have an eastern trajectory too. Because maybe they were thinking some of the satellite countries to the Soviet Union that they might want to place an umbrella over. I think this really is important to talk about in the context of the Ukraine right now. And the reason I think that's important is because we've often forget about ballistic missiles. We talked a lot about them in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I think even right now with our generation or two generations, we remember that. But people now are like, oh yeah, that's back then. Hey, you know what? We still have a ballistic missile system, right? There are still nuclear umbrellas by China, by Korea, by France, by Britain, by the United States. You could say Germany, but that's kind of NATO. And so I think in light of what's going on in the Ukraine, with being concerned about, wow, what are these people, what are they doing with it? You know, you hear on the news, are they going to attack a nuclear facility? Right? Is there a weapon site there? What missiles are they going to use? It's kind of like we're thinking about what's going on in other parts of the world, but we have to be reflective that that's happening here too. We still have ballistic missile sites and things like that among us. Not anymore in Chico, but definitely in the country. And if you've ever driven across Wyoming, I love Wyoming, or Idaho, those are great places to have ballistic missile sites because there's a whole lot of nothing going on there. Right? Great place to fly fish, but you know. I also think from a friend of mine who worked in the Air Force in the Ballistic Missile Division too, other than the fact that he was a deer hunter and he knew if he got stationed in Wyoming he could get a master's while working at the missile silo and hunt really good deer. I think that's really why he wanted to do it. But I do think that once the Chico sites were decommissioned in the 1960s, people started to become a little bit more interested in what the government was doing, and you guys understand what I'm saying, right? The 60s is much more of a questioning environment than the 50s. And so I do think by moving these missile complexes to the center part of the United States, it probably is also an attempt to maybe get a little away from population centers, right? Maybe if you want to come check out a missile silo, you're going to have to drive to Wyoming, and you're going to have to get the cattle ranchers. We all watch Yellowstone, right? You're going to have to get the cattle rancher's permission to go onto his property to go check out the missile sites. So probably for secrecy reasons and security reasons, it's also a good idea to move the missiles out of the West Coast.
I have another question when
Yep.
you just mentioned the property. How was the property acquired to put the missile silos there? And is it back in private property now, or is it still owned by the government somehow?
So currently it's privately owned. When it was purchased, it was purchased from a private, so the military bought it from a private owner. Same thing with the land in the Buttes. And Beale Air Force Base owned the land where the Beale site was. It's adjacent to the base. So as far as I know right now, the government still owns one of them, and the other two are privately owned. And I'm not going to mention those people. I know one of them because I feel like that's their private information. But the Chico site has passed through hands several times over the years, and some people have stripped copper wire out of there. But for a lot of people, at least the Chico site has been a liability pain in their rear, because people were sneaking down there. I don't know if you know this, but there was someone who died down there. They actually drowned. There was a college student, female, that fell, but she was okay. They got her out of there. But there was a young man that fell, and by the time his friends could come back, they tried to drive into town to go get a rope to come get him. And when they came back, he couldn't tread water anymore, and he had already drowned. So those open parts to the sites don't exist anymore. So I'm going to show you a door that does get down into them on the missile sites, but you'd have to know to get down there. So they're a lot safer now, but they still are liability concerns for the people who own the site. But out there, I'll show you, the crane's not out there anymore. The boom that was out there is not out there anymore. Some of the old pieces of junk that were thrown around that kids they're not out anymore. So it's a lot cleaner site now than it was in the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Is there 3 then silos out there?
There's-
I've only seen the one open.
Yeah, there's 3. Just like that. There's 3 silos. It's silo 851A, B, and C, or launch A, B, and C. That site is Site C. They're always using nomenclature the same way in the military. So of the 3 sites, the Beale site's A, the Lincoln or the Sutter Butte site is B, and the Chico site C. And then also at the Chico site is Launcher A, Launcher B, and Launcher C. This, if you want to show people something that's really brief, this is the Air Force's description from a person at Beale Air Force Base. This is what they put out about the Chico site. And it's from the 9th Reconnaissance Wing of Public Affairs. And so that's what's there. There you go. Right? It's talking about a little bit about when they built it, a little bit about the dates of its commission, and a little bit about it when it was decommissioned. So that's their stance. I think we've covered the arms race security aspects. we do understand massive retaliation and mutual assured destruction, right? Because a lot of people are going, why would you ever build a missile that is 100 feet tall that could blow up an entire city? And we've kind of covered that a little bit. Again, there's the site. For those of you who are really interested, there's a site for sale.
Deep in Washington State is a Titan missile silo that was on the front line of America's Cold War defense. The Larson Air Base Titan I missile silo.
So that's the one I showed you earlier, and I just found out, I hope the link works because it just went up a little while ago. They're putting it up on sale, and they actually announced it on their local news channel, which I think is pretty interesting that you can buy a missile site.
How much? Do you know how much they're selling for?
I do not. There was a person that bought it before, and they bought it for like $1.6 million. And the reason why is this tour is fabulous. This is the woman I told you about before that films every single room. There are some places that have turned these into bed and breakfasts and hotels in Arizona. So you can actually, if you want, you can go to Arizona and you can spend the night in a ballistic missile silo. There's been other places they've tried to turn them into, like, I don't want to say a commune, but it's a cool kind of hippie connection with technology. There was a group of people that tried to buy one in Arizona and make it a completely sustainable community. So they were going to grow, like, not hemp, or not other stuff, but they were going to try to like grow vegetables in one of the underground facilities. They were going to try to like bring solar power in there, and they were going to try to do, I guess for lack of a better word, if you don't know this term, like the ultimate safe room. Right? Instead of having a safe room you go to, the world's collapsing on us, what are we going to do? You got a safe missile silo where you can grow food, raise food, I don't know, rabbits, I don't know what's going to go down there. But there's all kinds of different uses for missile silos right now. The one out here is just decommissioned, everything's ripped out of it. It's a very dangerous place to go because some of the sites they left what's called the subfloor. They left the floor in. This is one of them that I'm going to show you where you can walk. A lot of the other ones, they rip the flooring out, and so the superstructure of the subfloor with the metal and the concrete, it's about 4.5 feet. So if you want to walk around there, you have to bring a flashlight, as Dave said, and walk on a 5-inch wide piece of metal about 6 feet off the ground with all kinds of different pieces of metal, and you're walking miles up and down. And so there's certain sites, if it was me and I wanted to explore, I would go find the ones that were better to explore. There's also a Titan museum that you can go to, and they'll take you on a tour and take you down in. So I'm going to show you this real quickly. This gal's kind of quirky, but she's really interesting.
So that museum is the one in Arizona?
Yeah. There's one in Colorado too.
The world to see the space as I see it, casting away the shadows of what it once was, and embracing it through the eyes of a child. A child who saw its possibilities, limited only by imagination. A place of wonderment and adventure. A place to live, to play, and to learn. Long after I am gone, it will remain. Just like the pyramids before it, a testament to humanity's past. But perhaps in this future, what once held fear and death can be transformed into joy and life.
So that's part 4. I'm not going to show you the other ones. They're all links on here. She grew up 1 foot from the property line as a young girl. So obviously she's jumping the fence. And she has a connection to the owner of that site. And she takes you through a 4-part series at about 40 minutes apiece. And she will walk you through every single room and tell you everything you want to know in every single corridor. And she does it in a really, I think, kind of delightful way. She's an interesting person. She's not dry like me. Like, she's got a pretty good sense of humor, and she says off-color stuff sometimes, but she's really, really interesting.
It's not as cool a tunnel, in my opinion. But what's down here might be. first of the 3 missile silo sections. It looks all fancy and cool because of that independent film I talked about earlier.
So if you want, you can watch hours of people walking through tunnels. Which, yes, I have. This gentleman.
In this episode, we explore the remains of a former secret U.S. Titan I missile silo, where missiles with nuclear warheads were on alert. Hi, I'm Bob, an urban explorer, and with friends I explore the most amazing abandoned places worldwide. In this series, I'm in Colorado with Edwin, and in previous episodes, we explored abandoned gold mines and other interesting locations. It's our last night in Colorado, and we still have a cool mission waiting. A Titan I missile silo.
So this guy's awesome for 2 reasons. His accent, and he's totally cloak and dagger. Like, he goes into places all over the world with his buddies when he's supposed to or not supposed to. And he has this website, and then he films them. And so if you want to get that, it'd be a cool thing to show grandkids or young kids, because they love, you know, if you just show the Martin Marietta film, right? Teenagers are going to be like, yeah, okay, whatever. But if you show, you know, I'm in the middle of the night, I'm in Colorado, and my buddy's meeting me, this guy's great. And he goes through the whole thing. And then a friend of his talked him into he does a 63-part series called Living in an Abandoned Missile Site. So it's got 63 episodes of different missile sites and where you want to go and what you want to do.
I guess so.
First thing I'm looking at is, yep, the seals. All this is a joke. Yep. So back in the day when I decommissioned it, a demolition ball was dropped to destroy all the pins here, to render it useless, and immobilize it from actually opening up again. You can see all the seals.
So I won't make you dizzy. He's talking about the decommissioning of the site, and he's talking about how they dropped, basically they tried to take away any ability to open those doors, so they ruined the hinges on it.
America's newest and most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile, the Titan, is combat ready for the Strategic Air Command.
You can see all 3 of them there.
A squadron of 98-foot weapons is capable of hurling nuclear warheads at enemy targets 6,200 miles away. Complex of 3 missiles is an underground city whose only residents are 14 Air Force officers and men on duty around the clock. The Air Force says the intercontinental missile force will triple this year and triple again next year. If their dread powers ever meet.
So again, cloak and dagger, but what I enjoy about this gentleman is in each one of his episodes, he goes back and drags some of those old government photos out, plays them before he's going into the thing. So a lot of the research on this, if you're going to be your own historical buff and enthusiast, you're going to find that a lot of things you're looking for are hidden in other things you might not want to find. So some of the best government descriptions and things I haven't found on government websites, and I found in someone's clip that was them, and that's why I'm showing you that. It's really hard to kind of like piece out these things. Thank you for being patient. My name's Doug Williams. I'm the principal of Chico High School. I was thrilled to speak to you. I'm sorry if I went over. I know I didn't touch on everything, but there's 1,000 things to look at in this. What I'm hoping is that you will take my email, send me an email, and I will send you either a PowerPoint link with all these, or if you're a Google person, you know what I'm talking about if I say you're a Google person, I'll send you a link to the Google Slides. If you want to come talk to me about it, or if you want me to print it out for you, I'm welcome. I'll do that too, on the school district's dime. Just don't tell me. Okay? Thank you.